interrupt this program for a special advertising break.
Wild bees are essential to our survival, but no one listens to them. So how can we make their beautiful voices heard? Well, there is a Google tool for that.
Hold on, let me try.
You probably already guessed it. We gave this hum to search tool to wild bees. Introducing Bee Radio by WWF.
Bee Radio.
Together with the Federal Institute of Agriculture, we recorded their humming. And as the humming changes between bee type, weather, and time of day, a diverse playlist was generated in real time. The songs went live on their very own online radio station, with all the ad revenue going to the WWF Wild Bee Fund. The online streams were so successful that the bees also took over Germany's biggest private radio station as program directors.
Hier ist das Antenne Bayern Musikexperiment.
Unser Bienenradio.
Up to now, our bees generated more than 750 songs. On average, people listened to Bee Radio for 31 minutes. And overall, more than 1.2 million minutes were streamed. Bee Radio by WWF. A radio by bees to save the bees.
And now back to our regularly scheduled program.
Well, I'm not quite sure how to follow that, except by saying I'm glad we're not focused on copyright today, or the bees could be in trouble. This afternoon, we are going to focus on trust and privacy. And to kickstart us, we're going to have a panel ably moderated by Jacob Dexe, who is Public Affairs Manager from IAB in Sweden. You're going to be looking at how to ensure that personalised advertising benefits consumers and businesses alike. So strap in. We've heard a lot about this morning, but we're going to go a deep dive now. So Jacob, over to you to introduce your panelists.
Thank you very much. Yes, to solve this issue, we have an esteemed panel. I welcome up Maria-Myrto Kanellopoulou from the Commission, DG Just, Head of Unit Consumer Law. We have Marco Pierani, who is the Director of Public Affairs and Media Relations at Euroconsumer. We have Stacey Featherston, who's the Public Policy Manager for Consumer Policy at Meta, and Stevan Randjelovic, who's the Head of Public Policy and Industry Relations at WPP. Welcome up. I am, however, going to start with sort of setting the scene for this panel. So that we sort of know what world we're looking at. This morning focused on the contributions of the advertising industry and a few of the challenges that we're facing. We're now moving on to what I consider one of the most important topics that we are facing and one of the biggest obstacles, that is how consumers perceive the advertising industry. This session is called How to Ensure that Personalized Advertising Benefits Consumers and Businesses Alike. And this comes with a few assumptions. For one, it assumes that advertising is indeed beneficial, much like we've heard this morning. We are a sector that contributes about 59 billion euros to the EU economy every year. We have an ad-funded internet that continues to bring consumers access to journalism, entertainment, and opportunities. It allows companies to meet and establish relationships and find new markets to sell their products. So far, so good. The second assumption, however, is that there are obstacles. And specifically, there are obstacles in that consumers and businesses view these benefits differently and perhaps may not perceive them as benefits all the time. I'm just going to try to find my notes as well. That would be helpful. So for the industry, I think it's necessary to understand and negotiate how consumers are affected by and how they perceive advertising. Partly, and this is sort of cynical, it's because a lot of the regulation that the industry is facing is based on protecting consumers. More importantly, without consumers that interact with, engage with, and notice advertising, there isn't much of an industry to be had for us. In March, IAB Europe is going to launch a large consumer study of the European market and the consumers' attitudes towards advertising. I can't share any numbers just yet, but I have a few indications that might help this conversation along. First off, the initial findings of the study indicate that consumers have more faith in the legislation and the data protection legislation than in the company's abilities to adhere to the legislation. Second, people are more trusting towards, or more positive towards, relevant ads, and they find more relevant ads to be less intrusive to their experience online. Third, however, is a minority are able to recall a relevant ad or an ad that is relevant to a purchase that they plan on making. In Sweden, we did a similar study where we found that 41% of all Swedes dislike but accept advertising, and 44% actively try to avoid advertising. And those numbers are not very nice for us. That is at least one version of the dilemma that this panel is going to talk about. The advertising industry is creating more value, it's growing, but it's faced with consumers who are reluctant and dislike ads, and legislators that want to protect consumers. So I'm going to start this panel by asking Stacey, and the others are also going to answer this question. How would you characterize this state of play for the industry?
Yeah, I think you can boil it down to two principal things. On the one hand, we have a sector that is a huge value driver for Europe. You just cited some figures. We have numbers that look that every dollar spent on meta platforms generates $3 for that advertiser. So we have a huge value proposition here in Europe. In particular for smaller companies who may not have large advertising budgets to be able to get that bang for their buck, so to speak. Then this second characteristic that we have is that we have a very highly regulated sector. This is a conversation that we've been having for many years, and it's a place where we should have legal and regulatory certainty at this point. But we find ourselves at a juncture where we know that these are conversations that continue to resurface, and we question the value in sort of covering that ground again and again with each new mandate. We think that there was some quite balanced outcomes coming out of the last mandate, and now to protect the value proposition, we need that legal certainty. But to protect consumers, we also need to make sure that the legal certainty that we've achieved is applied. And so that's where that focus on making sure that these rules are enforced, that advertisers or economic operators who don't follow the rules, that they are made to follow them. And we think that those two characteristics in harmony can really deliver the best outcome for both consumers and businesses.
Stevan, do you agree?
Yes. But I would like to challenge the premise that only regulators care about consumers. You know, the currency that advertising operates on is trust. If we are being misleading, targeting people based on their vulnerabilities, extorting, etc., we are effectively losing that trust, and we are losing the value of our craft, which is convincing people and selling products, which is the basis of capitalism that we all live in. So therefore, I would really challenge that it is in our best interest to have appropriate relationship with the consumer, and the only way to do that is by following these rules, of which we have far too many, and we are about to get more. I actually have a list, and we've come to the point where I need a piece of paper to read you all the pieces of legislation that we have legislating our sector, and it's a very long list. But effectively, what we do, and where I agree with Stacey, is that we need clarity and proper enforcement of these rules.
So if anyone wants to read the list, go see Stevan in the coffee break later.
Find me in the lobby.
Yeah. Marco, from the consumer side, what would you say?
I'm listening that everybody is caring about consumers, and there is over-regulated market with the big tension to protect consumers. And I understand the issue from industry of being over-regulated, and that sounds something that I understand. It's compliance with legislation is always something burdensome. But I believe we have a strange storytelling. Everybody is really taking care of consumers, but consumers are not happy. So I believe we are, I will propose a change of paradigm, say we are facing a sort of market failure, and that's why the legislator is keeping on coming with new legislation. This is probably not the optimal way through, because I also plead for enforcement of the current legislation and enforcement in an harmonized way, considering that we have an internal market in Europe that should be treating all the operators the same way and all the consumer everywhere in the same way. So what, maybe I keep it for the second round, but what I plead is to consider consumer an active part of this market. If we go in that way, then probably we can release the overload of legislation.
And Myrto, where do you fall between market failure and no confidence in legislation?
I have to say that I'm quite positively surprised with how the panel is starting, because I can agree with a lot of what has been said, especially as regards the fact that we are all up in this panel and the broader ecosystem striving for increased consumer trust. This is what keeps the market going, and I sincerely believe that this is a common goal. Now, what we consider necessary to get there sometimes differs, and from the European Commission side, our starting point was really to ensure, as Commissioner McGrath has also emphasized in his hearing, that consumers trust the market, and to do that, they need to know that their rights are actually do not only exist, but are actually respected in practice. Now, already several mentions have been made to more effective enforcement, and I would agree, over the past few years, the Commission has significantly strengthened the EU regulatory framework around digital services, including on advertising, and we are actively implementing and enforcing these rules. However, at the same time, technological developments continue. They continue at a very rapid pace, and our evidence shows that consumers do not feel that their rights are indeed effectively protected in this kind of fast-paced environment. We conducted recently a digital fairness fitness check of our core consumer legislation, and there the findings are very telling. I will mention only the numbers when it comes to personalized advertising, for example, and personalization practices more broadly, where we had 74% of the consumers surveyed saying that they feel that their personal data is misused. They are not sure how it is collected, how it is applied, and whether it is used fairly. Now, this fits with the findings with previous studies in 2023, for example, where again we had over 70% of consumers expressing the same number of concerns, and I want to emphasize that this represents a 20 percentage points increase compared to our last survey in 2018. So I think it's worth for all of us here to reflect why, in an environment where everyone claims their objective is consumer trust, where our rule book is being constantly expanded and enhanced, consumers feel less protected than before.
May I just jump in quickly? So there is another piece of a figure from that fitness check that says 41% of consumers experience a situation where the design or language of the website, the app, made it difficult to understand how their personal data would be used. Now, I would argue that those 41% do not understand what's happening, partly, actually quite a lot due to the legislation that exists in that field, aka GDPR, which has a terribly long list of everything that you have to disclose to a consumer every time they accept cookies or they do not accept cookies. And that piece of legislation has been around for 6 years. Has it been truly effective in informing the consumer? So I think we need to look at, existing legislation and wonder, it's not only a failure of companies to do better, but it's a failure of legislation to appropriately address the issues of trust and transparency.
Do you want to counter that?
Yes,
the Commission has talked about consent fatigue, for instance, in the cookie pledge in the last mandate. So this seems to be something on the radar. How do you see that as an effect of the legislation, that people are tired with consent?
First of all, I will not dispute that it should be our objective whenever we come with new legislation also to simplify and clarify the rules. That is a very clearly stated objective from the side of the Commission, also as regards our plans for a future Digital Fairness Act. Now, of course, simplification, clarification does not mean lowering the level of protection or questioning the substantive rights that are granted through legislation like the GDPR to consumers, which, as you said, Jacob, at the very beginning, they appreciate and trust a lot. But yes, indeed, from the Commission side, we embarked over the past years in several exercises. As far as DigiJustice is concerned, I'm sorry for the mic, we had a very useful exercise with industry representatives around cookies, the cookie pledge exercise, and we are taking some of the lessons learned from this exercise in our preparatory work for the Digital Fairness Act. But I wouldn't like to preclude where this impact assessment will end up, also because, as I mentioned, technological developments move at a very rapid speed. So we have indications, not only by our own, from our own studies, but also from data coming from, for example, the Danish Ministry of Digital Affairs, who conducted very thorough studies in this regard, that more and more unfair personalization occurs before even consent is requested through browser fingerprinting technologies and so on. So I think we need to look much more from an open, with an open mind to the issues again, and see how we can provide technology neutral and future-proof solutions for consumers. This is the strength of our consumer legislation. We work on the basis of principles. We don't focus on specific categories of traders, specific technologies, but we need to make sure that our rules are up to date and are detailed enough to be able to enforce them effectively.
Do you feel that they're succeeding in this, Stacey?
Well, I mean, I think we've been hearing things like tech neutral and future-proof for a long time, so I'm kind of baffled that we aren't there yet. You'd hope that we'd already have established, after years and years of negotiations and conversations, trying to reflect all of the different interests around the table, that you would have arrived at a robust and flexible acquis, and I do think that we're there in many ways. And I think it comes down to the application thereof. Now, of course, we can recognize the fact that there's a discrepancy in the preferences that consumers profess to have, and then their behavior online. And I think a lot of times the regulatory outcomes are trying to enforce an artificial solution to a problem that the market isn't necessarily demanding. And so as businesses, where we're trying to respond to those market demands for personalization, looking for relevant content services at a low cost or no cost, these things need to be financed in some way, shape, or form. And that's what I think we're here, is to try to make sure we're preserving an open and ad-funded internet, and how to do that hand in hand with the consumer and with their interest. The approach that we've taken at Meta that we think has been quite successful is to be indeed as open as possible about the way that the business model works and the way that the services and content that people access are funded, that it is a business, and providing as high a level of control as we can to the consumer so that they can go in and set their preferences so that we start to decrease that discrepancy that I was referring to before with what the market is telling us and demanding in terms of wanting to be able to access these low-cost or free services and content, but also being able to protect those rights and allowing for that toggle and that flexibility within the legal guardrails that we are, of course, applying in earnest. So I agree to disagree in the fact that I don't believe that there's a necessary that it's necessary to have a regulatory intervention at this stage. I think that the results of the fitness check, the results of other studies, the different statistics that we can all cite up here on stage, I think it's really a question of trying to preserve an optimal amount of choice. And the more you regulate and the more you reduce the span of legal activity for businesses, the more you can actually reduce consumer choice, whether it's in terms of the types of services that they can access and the content that they access and the diversity thereof, but also the amount of options they have in order to not have to be applying subscription models or other models that businesses may be forced to put into place in order to compensate for the loss of revenue in digital advertising. So I think the artificial solutions that we see trying to really tunnel people into one given solution is perhaps counterproductive to actually opening up consumer choice and providing a level of control as advertisers or providers of advertising platforms to make sure that they are able to within the regulatory framework, express their preferences and try to chip away at that discrepancy that Myrto was referring to in terms of what we're hearing and what we actually see in terms of consumer behavior.
Marco, do you agree that consumers are facing too much choice?
I think consumers are not in the position to express yet in this market an informed and significant choice. I want to make a step back because it seems I am negative. I want to say we see the value of personalized advertising as helping consumer potentially to find relevant product and services. This is an assumption. You start from assumption, and I think there. We see also that technology is really evolving at a very high speed. So the expectation from consumer side is that we are enabled to make this choice more easily and considering the implementation of the technology that should be there to make the market work better. So I believe personalized advertising can be a good also for consumers, but we must, in order to make some step ahead, we must define what make personalization still problematic nowadays. So I say it before, but I like to I really don't, I'm not in love by definition with legislation per se. I mean, that's, I don't find it even sexy. No, just to make it clear, I mean, that's not, but it's need when things are not going well. So, I mean, you reverse the storytelling, but this is what we are facing. Because we are, I mean, the nice thing of consumer organization is that they work transversally on different sectors and different things. So we see where things are. So, sorry, I say before, this is a market failure. It's a market failure for a few years. So one point that I want to try to make clear, at least from my angle, is that consumer, through their data, they must be recognized as an active part of this market. If we don't trigger this concept, we can have ton of legislation. We will always argue, this is unfair, it's over-regulated. But if you don't click this concept, then it's difficult to really find a win-win implementation of the technology that is there.
May I ask, what does it mean to be active part of, for you, active part of the market?
I am a consumer. I confer in the market my personal data that has an economic value. So privacy is a fundamental right, but my data has an economic value. I confer, so I would depart from the concept of consent as a bureaucratic feature. I consent because I enter in a deal, okay? So this is
contract, yeah.
This is changing the framework. This is probably something we disagree.
Stevan, do you have more comments on this?
No, I do believe that there is I mean, advertising funds partly, actually to a great extent, the internet. So there is consumers are already active part of that exchange. Now the terms may differ from one market to another, how it's regulated, but I don't believe that consumers are not active part of the internet contract that we all live.
The point of that you complain, sorry, but I want to build on this. The point that was argued before, that the problem is how legislators intervene and then, you know, the cookie wall and whatever, it's a problem for consumers and also for business, is because probably the concept that is behind is that you need to check something. The conception from both sides that we are contributing, we should contribute to a better environment, a better market, a more active participation. So I would like, at least personally, to receive advertisements that are good for me. Not advertisement, for example, that advise me to go in Berlin while I was going already in Berlin. This is on the 90s, maybe was a problem. But so I would plead to have better personalized advertisement that help my life, which is not there. So I want more, not less, okay? But I want something meaningful and also respecting my choice when I decide not to get any advertisement. This is an active participation of a consumer.
If we, I'm going off script, just so you know. If we say that consumers should value their data to a larger extent, but we also see that when, for instance, consumers are asked about how much their data should be worth or how much they should be recompensed for or compensated for use of data, they cite fairly high numbers that don't really fit with how they act on the marketplace. Do you feel like consumers have the ability to value their data? Stacey or Stevan?
Or Maria.
Or we'll come to Myrto. It's fine.
No, I think again, it's not about trying to quantify that. You know, if you started to do that, you know, whose data is worth more or less, you start to put up walls in the internet. I think again, you know, I don't want to paraphrase what Marco's saying, but I think if we can provide meaningful control, and if we can provide transparency about the way that data is collected, the way that it is minimized, the way that it is not sold, the way that it is shared across different services that one may or may not be using online, I think that that gives the consumer the cards in his or her hand to be able to make decisions about that data. And so that, I think, is something that we would wholeheartedly endorse. And that transparency and accountability about the way that information is used to finance the different services and content that people are accessing online, I think is something that we need to make sure is readily available. And that can increase the trust that is underpinning all of this. So I don't think it needs to be a question of value or understanding, you know, applying a dollar value to data. Like Marco was saying, privacy is a fundamental right in this regard. I think it's more of a question that the consumer realizes that their data has a value, that it's that value that is providing all of these services and content online, and that they have control over the way that that value is then translated into the types of advertisements they may see, and that they realize that in viewing that ad, that is financing their activities on a variety of platforms, applications, you name it. Now, we've had to, over the course of the last year, make 2 major changes to our business models to provide additional options, right? So we have a subscription model, and we also have a version with less personalized advertising. This goes beyond what regulation is requiring of us, but it is an important step to try to make sure that we're putting forth these options. And that's, again, where we really do see this discrepancy again. We've put these solutions into place in an attempt to answer both the regulator, but also the consumer demand for more choice. But we don't see a lot of uptake of those options, right? And so it's, again, this discrepancy, and how can we decrease that as much as possible to provide the maximum amount of control, but still be able to finance the products and services that people rely on.
The fact that you don't have an uptake is what I would say is sort of, it's sort of an argument that consumers have a hard time finding a way to value their data. They don't know how to articulate that. Is the industry doing enough to give that ability, Stevan?
God, is it our job to tell the consumers how they should value their data? Yeah. Is there an academic here? But
could you solve this for us now?
No, the way I'm thinking about it is you have a law that clearly attempts to balance the right to privacy, data protection with business interest, and then you have the businesses, and it should be up to businesses how they model their offer to consumers and bring them in and explain that value exchange. For example, recently, I think yesterday, I read somewhere, Netflix, as you know, has 2 tiers. One is full paid tier, and the other one is you pay less, but you get also advertising with it. And from what I've read is that they have far more subscribers now to that tier, which you pay less and you get some advertising, personalized advertising. And that's a clear example of a company who has taken the law, applied it, created a business model, given it, and now consumers should be able to understand that there is an exchange. But I don't believe that every business needs to put a cookie banner, another banner, call it a value exchange banner, explaining, when you click yes, this is the list of all the things that you get. Because guess what? They wouldn't read.
I don't want to give the Commission any ideas, but what do you say about this?
No, I have to say I'm enjoying thoroughly this exchange, Jacob, because I think it gives a glimpse of the range of, let's say, requests and opinions that we are faced with. There are those who, like Stacey say, we already have all the legislation we need in place. It's just a matter of enforcing it, making it work. And we have others that go far beyond what Marco is saying, and saying none of this works. What you need is privacy or fairness more broadly by design. By default, consumers don't want to have to think about it. They just want their fundamental right to privacy respected without them having to make an active choice. But I think the starting point for all of us, again, needs to be the data. Something is clearly not working. You mentioned already the 40% figure of consumers who find it difficult to understand how their data is being used. But over 30% also report that they find it practically very difficult to control, to opt out of personalization practices or to modify their privacy choices, privacy settings. So I understand that the industry is taking steps. Some of it is also to comply with recent legislation like the DSA, for example. But again, I think we need to look to the extent that these steps are being effective and are granting really the consumers not only transparency, which is of course the first level that we should strive for, but also indeed effective control. We also have case law that is rapidly developing when it comes to this type of pay or consent models. So all of this we need to take into account designing the way forward. I have 3 considerations to make on broader issues that have been brought up, and I don't want to leave the room without without answering them. But I don't know, Jacob, if you want to introduce another circle of topics.
I was going to ask you to start talking about the DFA, but if you have
that's a
something
good.
else
That's a very good cue then, because I want to dispel a few misunderstandings. First of all, we don't need to be convinced of the fact that we shouldn't overregulate. We don't want to overregulate. This is a commission that has made it very clear from day one that boosting Europe's competitiveness is a key central objective of this mandate. We have several initiatives aiming specifically at that, and all our proposals, including, of course, the proposals on the Digital Fairness Act, will be subject to a very big scrutiny in terms of the regulatory and economic impacts. So we go there with a mindset of addressing specific gaps in legislation, of clarifying existing rules, because we feel that this is a primary reason why the rules currently are being applied insufficiently and are not sufficiently enforced. And as Commissioner McGrath has stressed repeatedly, we are not seeking to duplicate or reopen issues that have been recently regulated, including notably by the Digital Services Act. But I want to recall to everyone around here that all the instruments that have been adopted over the past years do not have a scope of application as broad as our horizontal consumer protection legislation. A lot of the online trade, a lot of the advertising does not happen, for example, in the top big platforms, happens on single trader websites. And there we also need to make sure that we create a level playing field. The other element I wanted to emphasize is that we don't see a dichotomy between better enforcement and new legislation. It doesn't mean that while we are preparing the Digital Fairness Act, we will forget about the existing rules and we let them live their life. We have concrete enforcement actions that are ongoing, including towards players present in this room, both under the Digital Services Act framework and under our Consumer Protection Cooperation Regulation, and we will continue to do that. But the element of clarification of the rules that I mentioned in the beginning, we also see it as an opportunity to make things better, simpler for the advertising industry, for online traders. Every study that is out there on dark patterns, and I'm not talking only about the Commission's sweep, but also studies conducted, for example, by the German umbrella organization of consumer organizations, they estimate that a figure between 70 and 90, over 90% of websites deploy at least one so-called dark pattern. Now, I refuse to believe that this is a matter of enforcement, that we need to just go out and chase each and every website and trader that is out there. It is also an indication that something in our legal framework is not sufficiently clear. And by making it clearer, we'll make it also easier for businesses to abide by these rules.
May I just quickly, on the opt-out, 38%, what was it, 35-38% people who don't
34.
know how to opt out. So I go back, there is, the GDPR is, people may not like it, but it has an entire article only on consent and how to, who needs to give the right to people to opt out or not. We don't need, and then on top of that, we have like guidelines from the European Data Protection Board, from God knows how many DPAs across Europe. And if you are a business, you sit down, you read the GDPR, you read all these guidelines, and then you're utterly confused. So what we need is not, you said it right, clarity, but clarity not achieved through new regulation, but clarity achieved through guidance, through, enforcement. You may enforce against one website, but there is market dynamic in it, but once when you enforce, actually other people fall in line. So it's not, I'm afraid that regulation is not the only instrument that the Commission has at its disposal. And if I may just touch on one point. the competitiveness, which is like a zing word these days in Brussels. When the competitiveness compass was recently announced, there was this big push for deregulation, and then the regulation is only about, slashing the public reporting rules for publicly facing companies. Not a single word that I have seen, maybe I'm wrong, deregulating or cutting red tape in the digital sector, which is one of the main drivers of the European competitiveness. Advertising is the way all companies in this continent communicate to their consumers. So it is inherent to each company, and compliance with advertising adds additional regulatory burden, not to 1, 2, 3, or 5 companies, but to every single company, from SME to a big one. So when we speak about competitiveness and slashing regulation, we can't just speak about, let's do what's popular, but let's not look at another layer of very dense regulation, which is digital and advertising in general.
Marco, I'm going to go to you next, Stacey. Marco, what do you feel about what Stevan said?
I believe we are in a moment, so I would like to put some optimism in this debate. I hear about competitiveness, new mantra that I fully share. I hear about the correct from the point of view of industry of over-regulation that could impact something that is per se good in advertising industry. So this undermines the effectiveness of your business. I represent the the perception of not being respected from consumers. These are, since nobody is happy, I believe we have an opportunity here to really use the technology we have to make this possible. We have seen in the last years things that in other markets wouldn't be even imaginable before. Can we just for once maybe put our mind to try to solve this issue? Because it should be pretty much easy to find the solution. You need to, if you will find, and this is really a request to the industry, if you find a way through, I believe everybody will be happy. The point is, you need to consider that you also serve the consumers in this way, because the consumers are participating in this market. So I believe the goal is, and I understand, I used to be a lawyer. This is not, I'm not anymore, so that's good. I understand that compliance is a big matter for companies, small and big. I would say even worse for the small ones, because this is really big problem for SMEs to be compliant with this regulation. The point is, if there is a kind of mindset in the market to respect the regulation at a lower level, we will not make this step ahead. Okay? So probably you can release the over-regulation if you start deciding to comply at a higher level of percentage of that.
I'll count that.
I'm going to give to Stacey instead.
Afterwards.
Actually, I wanted to come back to some of the statistics and also from a point of optimism. In particular, in preparation for this panel, I went back to, I think it's the 6th annex of the fitness check results and read through the section on personalization. And I was actually struck by the silent majorities. The statistics that are cited there, 40%, 37%, whatever it might be, I see those and I see 63% actually aren't experiencing these problems, or there's a majority that understand the way that their data is being used, that there's been progress made, and if you look to how recent the wider digital rulebook is here and governing the B2C space, you see that there's a lot of room for optimism that when that framework is fully into place and the dust settles and the case law develops and all of these different things that we saw also coming out of the review of the modernization directive, they're saying it's too early to tell where this train is going. Our plea would be to let it get there. Let that regulatory certainty take hold in this industry, and then maybe you would have more clarity towards the consumer if the industry also understood through the case law, through the way that the law is applied, through the way that is enforced, what it means in practice. I think that there is a lot to be said for starting with what we have. And like you said, it's not a dichotomy. You can do one while you consider what to make of the fitness check results longer term. But I do caution, we know how Brussels works. We know that only the European Commission has the right of initiating legislation. We know, though, that only the European Commission's proposal is subject to impact assessments in this town. What will happen throughout the legislative process, and the fact that these things tend to take on a life of their own, is then anyone's best guess. And I find that the Commission has been very cavalier, frankly, with the fact that they don't have control over that process. Once the proposal, let's give everyone the benefit of the doubt, even if it's targeted, proportionate, you name it, what happens then as it goes through the negotiations, and we've seen this in many, many cases, can be a very different outcome than what the Commission originally envisioned. And that is why I think if you start with what you have on the table, if we think about enforcement, if we think about letting the wider digital rulebook come into play here, where we've seen meaningful changes and balanced regulatory outcomes, then we can get closer to establishing that certainty for industry, but also certainty for consumers on the other side. And why not have the Commission play a role in that enforcement? That hasn't been the case. It's very unevenly enforced consumer law. It's very, we don't have a harmonized situation. That's something that I think is worth considering in equal measure to any other new rules, that if they're not enforced, let's face it, will do absolutely nothing to change the situation at hand. So I take heart in the fitness check results in the sense that a lot of these silent majorities are there across the different problematic practices and concerns. I think that through case law and proper enforcement, we will have more certainty both for consumers, but also for businesses in terms of how the law is to be applied and how to comply with the vast variety of business models. You will have that choice. You will not have something that is over-prescriptive or interfering in the minutiae of the way that companies run businesses and the way that they connect and communicate to consumers. But you will have a situation where the framework is in place, and now we give it a chance to really take effect and work. So, we talked about solving the issue today. I'm not sure we'll get there, and certainly not in 2 minutes and 15 seconds. But I do think that where Marco's absolutely right is that dialogue and looking at the solutions that each party brings to the table, the regulator, the consumer, the business, and the businesses that are participating in the wider advertising ecosystem, I think that can get us closer. And so I do take heart in those silent majorities, as I am calling them, in the context of the fitness check, and I take heart in the outcomes that we had out of the last mandate. And I think that those put the tools on the table for us to move forward here and now. Industry's not waiting for a Digital Fairness Act or anything else to try to improve the situation that we have here on the table. I think it's a matter of getting that clarity and moving forward together so that we do have a situation where we have a tech-neutral and future-proof framework.
Myrto, you will get the
Yes,
final say on this panel.
Respectfully, I'd like to claim one of your 2 minutes left to challenge what I think is potentially a very dangerous and, I dare say, misleading reading of the results of the fitness check. First of all, there is no silent majority. There is a very vocal, absolute majority of 74% that says my data, as a consumer, I feel my data is being used unfairly in a misleading manner. Secondly, there are sub-questions where you have an option to say, what are you specifically concerned about? And there you have percentages like 40 and 34%, which maybe to Meta are not statistically important, but to the European Commission are important. If 1 in 3 consumers says, I am being targeted in an unfair way, my vulnerabilities are my economic situation, my family status is being exploited to market elements to me, then we will take a second look. So I just want to make it clear that there are no silent majorities here. The fact that somebody does not reply to a question does not mean they are not, let's say, concerned by the broader problem. The other element I wanted to make clear is that in terms of follow-up, we are not, of course, going ahead only on the basis of the data that is currently available. There will be a very broad public consultation where I will warmly invite everyone to be active and participate. I would encourage the industry in particular to provide quantifiable data. We hear a lot of arguments which we have sympathy for, that don't over-regulate because this can impact our business model, this can limit consumer choice, even though our data actually shows that consumers feel that their choices are restricted by over-personalized offers and prices. So on all these arguments, we really approach them with a very open mind, but please, in your responses, don't be ideological, be fact and science-based.
So it seems that, unfortunately, we didn't solve this issue today. And we look forward to discussing this issue more in the coming year. So thank you very much. And now we will leave the stage because we run out of time.